Hello and welcome to Analyzing Finance with Nick. I'm going to be doing another video about class hierarchies around the world. And the last example I'm going to use, I call it the European class hierarchy. But this generally applies to developed old world countries. This would also probably include Japan in this category and possibly Canada as well. That's what's kind of Canada is probably a hybrid between this and the American class hierarchy. Whereas Australia, I think, and New Zealand are probably closer to the American class hierarchy model. But Europe, this is really kind of describes Europe. And Europe, everybody thinks, oh, Europe's the most egalitarian place in the world. They don't have a restrictive class structure. That was all the old days before the revolutions and the world wars. Well, no. But really what the European elites did, starting with Otto von Bismarck, who was hardly a left-wing radical. He was known for being a conservative, but he was the one who brought in the German welfare state and was the first European power to really give generous social programs. What they did is that they were using the wealth and prosperity they gained from empire and economic advancement to buy off their lower classes and make them content enough not to challenge the established order. And this expanded after the Second World War, where the social welfare states expanded even more. And they did this along with having some of the steepest and highest tax rates in the world on income to basically create one giant lower middle class. And the old money continues to really rule things behind the scenes. And let's go with this chart. There's really three main tiers, and I size these buckets accordingly based on proportionate to how much of a size they are, except for the circles. I just had to make them a minimum size to fit the words in. But the underclass living off the state is the bottom. Europe has a generous social welfare system, and some people just can't produce enough basic work to cover themselves, or immigrants who are unable to assimilate, or who knows what. The unemployment rates are higher in these countries due to their priorities for social stability over economic growth, and therefore they tend to have tough hiring and firing laws, which just leads some people to not be able to participate, so they live off the generosity of the state. They're still a pretty small number. The vast majority of Europe I would put in the lower middle class. And what I mean by the lower middle class is that they make enough money to be comfortable and survive, but they are not really able to get ahead financially in any meaningful sort of way, in terms of through assets or being able to build businesses independent of the corporate and governments that hire these class of people. And so that's what I put them there. European GDP per capita in most countries are less than half that of the average American nowadays. And if you met Europeans who live in Europe, outside of those who are well-to-do or live in well-run countries such as Switzerland, you would be surprised how low their living standard is compared to the typical suburban American. You don't see any of these people driving big SUVs or pickup trucks in Europe. A lot of people still hang dry their clothes or live in small apartments, and they don't have a lot of the creature comforts that we take for granted here in American suburbia. And some people like that, but that's the cost of really having everybody similar level in a single lower middle class, is that advancement is difficult. The high taxes and the generosity of the welfare state really disincentivizes people to climb up, and also disincentivizes savings. Like according to Credit Suisse, the median Chinese citizen has more savings than the median European, even though the Chinese income is about a fourth of that of Western Europe. And the reason for that is because of things such as the government paying for healthcare, education, and retirement more generously means that European consumers really have less propensity or need to save, or at least they feel that way. And the next level above that, which is still in the same class, but is the managerial class. The managerial class will have higher incomes than the lower middle class, but not high enough that their lifestyle is completely disconnected from the vast majority of Europeans. Also not enough that they can just retire at 40 and chill out. These are the people who are the high level government bureaucrats or executives at European multinational corporations. And then really the only way really any of these people in this box can move up beyond the lower middle class box is through political action and running for office. Like similar old world regimes in the feudal system, the only way to move up was through political revolution and violence. That's why the feudal system failed, because there was no room for social mobility. The old money in Europe doesn't like social mobility. They never have and they never will. But at the same time, they know if they mismanage things bad enough that they will get risk of being overthrown by revolutions, like what happened in the 18th and 19th centuries. So the way that they've adjusted for that is to, at least on paper, cater to the egalitarian impulse that is common in Western Europe. And I used to really just not understand why Europe cared so much more about social stability and the tall poppy syndrome than America did. But then there was their history of violence through war and revolution kind of took a lot of the risk-taking capacity out of the region. Also, a lot of the more enterprising people would have moved to the Americas, and a lot of this welfare state was developed as an enticement to prevent their population from moving to America, where instead of getting welfare, they had either free land through the Homestead Act or just more economic opportunity due to the dynamic economic growth going on in America. And the other thing that really kind of drives this is why they like this is because they knew inherently that their systems were not fair, that there was always some, whether in the feudal class or ancien regime or any of these social structures in Europe, there was always just some old money elites and the politicians that they supported or were part of, in the case like of the monarchy days. And there was no chance, no matter how hard they worked, and even some of the wealthy merchants of the time who maybe had as much cash as the nobility would never have the same social status. So they're like, hey, we want to get rid of all of that, because and if these people don't deserve to be above us, why does anybody deserve to live above the mass? And so I think that's where a lot of that attitude came from, was just seeing these people who just through birth and entitlement have been ruling over them for centuries be put in their place. And the remaining old money has adapted to that. They've like progressive, the old money likes this arrangement too, because one, the high progressive taxes limit competition. Like Europe's economic system of high taxes and more difficulties in terms of barriers to entry for entrepreneurship and business competition favors established interests keeping their established interest. And the other also prevents people from challenging the existing wealthy's status through barging in with new money. And that is why they like this system the way it is. It prevents new people from going in. It also takes the social scrutiny off of them. And that's why a lot of these European income inequality statistics are so warped, because a lot of these old money people earn their money well before the era of progressive taxation and high inheritance taxes, and they make their money either through exemptions to that stuff or just through collecting residuals on family held land or businesses that go back centuries. Like the Heineken brand is owned by a company in the Netherlands that goes back to the 18th century. And there are plenty of medieval estates that are still owned by the same people. Like most of central London is owned by the same families that owned it during William the Conqueror's time in the 11th century. But you really don't hear about that. That's who the rich are in Europe. They're the same people who were rich 600, 700,000 years ago, even after a spat of revolutions. The only ones who really lost it were the countries that went full communist. And in order to prevent that from happening, the elites decide to give a little bit in terms of being a more generous welfare state. And in exchange, they get from it is social stability, no people threatening their lives or their status, and also higher barriers of entry to prevent new money from displacing them on top of the hierarchy. And really, the only way you can make it into that established old money class is to move up in the ranks in politics. And that's why I have that arrow there. Is that's like if you're a successful politician in the modern era, your family and descendants can be part of the old money establishment. The example would be the Bonapartes in the 19th century. Napoleon was from a relatively poor family in Corsica, but through his military and political accomplishments, didn't just bring up himself, but his entire family up into French society, and now they are considered de facto nobility. Then examples would also be descendants of other prominent political leaders throughout Europe. The Bonapartes are just the most obvious one. So that's really the case of Europe. It's not like Europe is just this egalitarian wonderland where everybody is equally middle class and prosperous. No. You have an overwhelmingly large lower middle class. You've used the tax revenue collected from them to keep the poor down to a minimum, meanwhile preventing a nouveau riche from competing with your old established interests. So the rich get what they want, less competition and less social scrutiny. The rest of the group gets what they want, is like pleasing their tall poppy syndrome and making sure that they have a social safety net, that they never fall through the floor. And I go into the elaboration on this in the American Dream versus the European Dream video I did several months ago. And if you want to build a society based off of that, this is the way it works. And when you look at it this way, it makes a lot more sense why the things that people think about Europe are really just kind of a modern misconception. And a lot of it is just an extension of the old system, just with some, what I call, revolution insurance. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think of this series. I'm going to do a final recap of some commonalities and key takeaways here and why I thought it was important to do a multi-part series on this. And let me know if you want me to keep going with these old money videos and diving into all of this, or should I just get back to country breakdowns and financial concept definitions? Thank you for watching.